Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're here today with Todd Horvitz. Todd leads insights for HP's $35 billion personal systems division. And he was previously with brands like Kantar, Disney, and Wells Fargo. Welcome, Todd. We are so excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Neeta, for having me this afternoon. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is mine. We will jump right in. Will you tell us a little bit about your role at HP?
Absolutely. So I lead part of our insights team around the world. As you said, we have a personal systems division, which is the majority of our company. We also have a print division. I work with them as well as part of my job. I've been here about a decade. I've had a variety of analytics and insights roles, and I love the company, our culture.
It's obviously such a massive, well-known brand. And insights, I imagine, in such a huge business division, there's a lot of scope to that. So I'm just curious to know, how do you stay current?
Yeah, we're in tech, which has the unique circumstance of what we call accelerated innovation. And this is not a pandemic. The speed of innovation, we've been tracking this for decades. It continues to get faster. I saw some stat the other day about a 375% increase in the number of patents since the 90s. Wow. Just astounding. And so me and other business leaders, we worry at night about keeping up. And I think in insights, there tends to be that we got to be perfect. We can't put something out unless we're absolutely sure it's down to the 10th decimal, and you can't survive. You cannot be relevant these days unless you're okay with the 80% answer. Otherwise, the business will move on. And as I said, in tech, that's particularly endemic, not just at HP. We tend to value our opinions sometimes. Not that tech doesn't like data, but sometimes the opinion can be generated faster than insights. So it's my job to be able to keep up with that. The second thing I would say is that it's important to bring in other viewpoints. You cannot always be the star of the show. In tech, we sometimes only want to hear from IDC and Gartner and the analysts and other techies. The reality is CPG, we've actually done surveys with personal coaches and architects and small business owners and all kinds of customers to bring in other perspectives, which I think is invaluable, especially in our field, to keep up to date and creative.
There's so much in that. And I think you're right, too, that insights is an incredibly fascinating field. I have gotten a lot of personal, professional value out of bringing that into work. But I think that it is misunderstood in a lot of ways. Do you find that too?
I love what you say about misunderstood. Yes, there's a lot of challenges. Sometimes people think what you do is no different than me going into Best Buy and being a mystery shopper. It's no different than me talking to my friends and family about why they use Apple versus another brand. All of those perspectives and all the data you can get from CRM and all the other databases we have is relevant. It's important to bring it all together. But the reality is, in insights, our sort of secret sauce is the ability to put and triangulate and have an objective, non-biased, not tied to one outcome or the other point of view that then leaders can decide how to make the right decision from it. But it's our job to pull all that together in an unbiased way. And I think sometimes that line between what we do and what a product manager or an exec or anybody else, a salesperson, should do as part of their job is misunderstood. So my job to change that.
You have had experience at so many interesting leading brands. And I wonder if you could maybe take us through a couple examples of how you're leveraging insights and how you're really making that a reality for the business.
Sure. I'm going to talk about Wells Fargo. One of the first things I did when I got there was to establish a straight, direct line with our president. Banking is very hierarchical. It's important that you get buy-in from your leaders, because that's going to dictate the learning agenda, the other business leaders' confidence in me. And she, frankly, had an outsized, in a good way, influence in the company. I just took advantage of it. There was this Amazon-style, pre-Amazon, brief process they used. Everything was distilled into a 3-page memo. Anything big you were planning on doing, whether it be a marketing strategy, a big yearly insights deep dive. The good thing about that, even though I hated it while developing it, because my marketing manager would point out every little red line, is you got everybody's buy-in. You became very clear about exactly what you needed to do, what the metrics of success are, and how the business, you and the business, are going to use. That was extremely important. It's something I've actually taken to HP and brought a lot of speed and gotten a lot of buy-in quickly here at HP. The last thing I would say is, when I was at Wells Fargo, is to tie Any work we do directly to revenue generation. In that case, at Wells Fargo, we were lucky. We had a CRM database. We knew the balances daily. The data we had was fantastic. You really had visibility into your customer's share of wallet and how you could impact that. I made sure we tied any survey work we did to that, because that was going to very quickly move the needle in the short and medium term versus the sort of academic projects that are long-term, and especially in that, where we had some very short-term revenue goals to hit. I made sure that at least half of my work was tied to tactical things that we could impact very quickly.
It's an important point, and you alluded to it. I think for a lot of folks who haven't had the benefit of really partnering closely with an insights team, this work sometimes seems very academic and esoteric. Worst case, studies that never see the light of day, right? The insights teams have done all this work and there is no one in the business paying any attention to this. I personally think that's the worst case on both sides. But at the same time, I think maybe one of the challenges that people don't know necessarily when to apply insights. Could you give us an example of when insights have maybe failed you, or when some of this work wasn't, in fact, the right tool to meet the moment?
Absolutely. A couple of years ago, somebody at HP had approached me. I'm going to try to mask this a little bit, around a loyalty program. Lots of companies have loyalty programs. We also have some at HP, but we don't have a more formalized loyalty program the way a Staples or another company might. I was all excited. We had a consultancy we were bringing in, and my job was to give an approach that we were taking and tell them why I took a beyond insights view of this and led the initiative in presenting it to our CMO. I didn't think that, great, we had done buttoned up insights work and we had objectives and all that. This is CMO's territory. He wasn't on board with this. We were coming in with a completely different part of the company, telling a CMO who had stood up loyalty programs in his previous roles many times. And I didn't think that through. I was so focused on the work, I didn't think about this guy's ego and the politics. Everything went south. We retooled and it was fine, but it was a rough 30 minutes. It wasn't the right time for insights. What we needed was buy-in and discussion and to get everybody on the right philosophy. The insights work and the competitive, that's all secondary and could be taken care of later, but this was much more important that we needed to do as a company. Live and learn.
It's such an important point, too, because we probably don't talk enough about how much the politics and the reality of the situation inside that organization matter. At the end of the day, a lot of this, especially the higher up you go in a company, is just personalities more than anything.
Exactly right. And this is, by the way, to be clear, this is not the CMO. This is actually someone that reported to CMO. Our ex-CMO is awesome. We got along great. To make that point.
I appreciate that clarification. How do people get insights right if they're non-insights people, or if they haven't had the benefit of working closely with an insights team?
We're tripping up on ourselves as an industry here. I'm going to bring up a controversial topic, which is UX research, which I love, by the way. One of the many approaches I was trained on early in my career. But I think UX is getting us into trouble, because if you look at the research jobs out there right now, design jobs, research jobs, I think UX is in some ways taken over. And people are confusing it, because honestly, UX is a philosophy, but it's really a technique of market research. It's philosophy and how you do it, probably no different than insights in general, in my opinion. But I think the jargon is confusing users who are already a little uncertain where the lines of insights are drawn from their own jobs. I think us as practitioners, we ought to just call it one thing versus nomenclature and you do this and I do this. The one good thing I will say is that I've seen a lot of MBA programs in the last 2 decades start to have insights. It's part of the MBA curriculum. And I think that's fantastic, because it gives a lot of the new junior talent I work with, new product managers just coming online, they already have some familiarity. Maybe they did a survey as part of their research methods, but that's awesome, because then they come in with a little bit of understanding and appreciation. It's my job to do the rest and show that it can be used for product development and brand understanding and other perspectives and on. And I think that's my job to do, but they come in with a little bit of knowledge and appreciation, which I think is making our jobs a lot easier than it was in the past. But the brutal truth about insights is that you have to constantly fight to remind people that you exist. One of the ways I do that in a company is not just attend our marketing leaders, staff meetings, when I have something to present, give a point of view just because you've sat in hundreds of focus groups and you know how IT leaders are probably going to react to a product or service described that way, and just offer a point of view and not be afraid to. It doesn't have to be a statistic. It doesn't have to be a formal presentation. Just offer a quick sentence point of view. I actually personally love doing that, sometimes even more than the formal 100-person webinars we do to share out results, because you're offering your value as somebody that can put yourself in a customer's shoes and knows what's confusing or irrelevant.
One of the things I've experienced, I didn't come up in insights, but my first career was in politics. I've seen a lot of practical application of a range of research tools, and the cycles would be short enough that you could actually see the payoff or the mistake. There was some closure.
Right.
But I think a lot of times in business, we don't necessarily get that. I'm also curious to know, why do you think it is that UX is dominating so much? Is it that people have a shorter cycle when they're using some of the techniques like UX?
I think that's spot on. They came in and did something that we as traditional classic market researchers were way too late to the party. We should have sped up. I remember in the late 90s working on early online survey tech at a consulting company I was at. It's been around since then, but we honestly have been taking 3 months to deliver a traditional insights project up until maybe a few years ago. 3 months minimum. And that doesn't even count the share out time and POs and all that stuff. And that's wrong. That is frankly wrong today in business. The other thing that I think UX researchers have done is they've tied themselves in more with the business. They are embedded in the business. The most successful insights stints I've had earlier in my career when I wasn't leading teams was when I was in the business and sitting with the designers and the PMs and the engineers and all of the go-to-market folks that make the product a reality and bring it to life. And you're sitting next to them in their scrum meetings and all of their sort of day-to-day. And you get that culture. B, you understand when to speak up and intervene. And C, they see you as part of the team. You're with the guys that are making the product. That is what a UX researcher does very well. They do that in our company, and we've frankly mimicked them. I've mimicked them because they have the ear of the business leaders. And I think that's frankly something we should. And again, let me be clear. UX research is invaluable. We use it. I use it. I couldn't do parts of my job and get HP.com to be as clear and improving as it is if it were not for that work. I just think that is one tool and technique that is part of the massive ways to get customer feedback. And I think we ought to see it for that.
What are some of the other tools and techniques that you wish leaders would incorporate or consider?
Couple of things. One is what we call co-creation. This has been around for well over a decade, but I think we're just starting to figure it out. UX researchers also use this very well. And that is where you bring in the customers into a session, you give them something to react to help you co-develop the product or an idea. And they play the role of the co-brainstormers, right? That help you build the essential elements of the product. And they help you check whether the product should even exist because there's a real need behind it. And how does that need manifest itself in their daily lives? That's something we do quite a bit. They call them pop-up communities or customer advisory boards. You recruit a group of people that could or should buy your product to look at your roadmap. They're under NDA and give you honest feedback on why they would be interested in that. And we've maintained those panels with small business owners, IT leaders, and in a tech company. I've done a similar thing at Disney. We had a moms panel that we consulted when we had licensing ideas. These are incredibly powerful for an executive to hear snippets of a customer talking about why this makes absolutely no sense or why we should have had this yesterday. So those are some great tools. Another one that I've seen recently, and I haven't used this yet, but I'm going to, is a creatively wired panel. Creative people their brains are actually wired differently. There's MRI studies that show that they are able to bring together disparate parts of their brain quicker than regularly wired people like me that are not creative. And there are a couple of tools out there where you can tap into this universe. So think art school students, right? To develop an advertising campaign or even to give you feedback on a new packaging idea. They're just a unique skill set, I think, that can be very powerful as a marketer and sometimes can tap into creativity that you don't have because you've been in bed with this product for 10 years and it's hard to see outside of it. That's another one.
When it comes to AI, I know you have been giving this a lot of thought. Obviously, a lot of corporate America is trying to sort out how to use AI and machine learning across functions. How are you thinking about it when it comes to insights versus marketing versus product?
Sure. First of all, I would say in some ways we've been using AI, though not Gen AI, for marketing and even for insights for a while. 5 to 10 years ago, it was much more about pattern recognition and just very narrow defined tasks. I'm equally, if not more knowledgeable about this field, you know that. Whereas now the AI is able to make a leap of faith and beyond the existing data and come up with something new, whether it's new content or a new idea. That's very powerful. Here's how I'm thinking about it in terms of the market research industry. I'd say there's 3 waves. The first is around efficiency. Something like our surveys show that about a third of workers are using AI daily. 75% have tried these tools. We're using it for work. And we're using it in ways to summarize existing data, to give ourselves a leg up to understand something quicker. Obviously, for insights, there's a lot of esoteric topics. I need to very quick technical topics. I got to get smart at quickly. My agencies are using it for first drafts of surveys, all about efficiency, brainstorming ideas and things like that. The second wave, which we're already experimenting with and is coming in the next couple of years, is deeper insights, because AI can look at a large amount of data. And believe me, one of the problems we have in market research or in business in general is we have too much data. We have syndicated data, we have focus group transcripts, CRM and call center data. We got to bring it together. AI can help segment, develop personas and mine data faster than humans, and then humans build off of that. Because any report, and I've seen agencies sort of beta tools where they write a first draft of a report, it's all automated, written by the AI. It's very mechanical, and it's fine for something very specific where there are very standard metrics and things like that. But you don't feel anything. They miss the emotions. They miss some of the bigger picture. And I think that's the human element. I think a second area within this idea of doing our current job better or deeper insights, a really cool one I saw from one of our agencies is chatbots that become one of your customer personas. So imagine we have a persona of creative professional, which is actually a group we care about a lot. You can talk to Christy, who's a creative professional, and she has all the data we've collected on her. And I can ask her questions around how she would use a new headset that would help her collaborate with other, marketers. And I can get her opinion on it because I know the way she thinks and tech tools and what her needs and how she works. I think that kind of thing, allowing a more interactive, engaging way to make the insights live, is a great way to allow our orgs and our insights groups to get deeper around existing insights. The third wave, which I would argue we can't really see yet, but it feels like it will be where AI becomes an extension of the team. And again, I'm not talking about replacing, but it may very well replace a lot of the tasks we do, and maybe even some of the things that a junior researcher would spend their first couple of years doing. You can imagine an AI actually, think the company Replica, which actually has AI beings you can be friends with. Think of that where they're actually moderating a conversation with somebody and can probe appropriately depending on the answers they get. You can do thousands of qualitative interviews at scale, quickly and cheaply with something like that once you get past the trust and the ethics. I'll bet there's 10 other ways that it will become an extension of the team. I would argue we can't see that yet.
On the Gen AI side, is there a quality control issue that you're still trying to navigate, or have you found a way through that?
We've done a lot of focus groups around this, from data scientists to business, just regular business marketers, business leaders. And I would argue everybody's in an experimentation phase and is aware it's experimentation. I think our expectations are low. If anything, I've seen people slightly push the boundaries of a tool and they're shocked that it worked. And they're like, oh my God, I can talk to this like a person. I guess it can do this. And then they gradually push it a little more. So I think for now, we're controlling that. As somebody that has studied psychology in school, I worry that as it becomes more conversational, just from the earliest research on human-computer interaction. If you put a face or a smile on a computer, on a machine, people respond to it differently. One of my favorite computer science anecdotes from the early 70s is about a tool called Eliza that was actually one of the first chatbots that a lot of people don't know about. It was based on very simple parsing technology. You'd say, I'm really tired today. It would say, why are you tired? It would just take bits of the sentence and just elaborate on it. What he noticed when he gave it to his team, actually gave it to his secretary to try out, and she asked him to leave the room and close the door because she was divulging her deepest secrets about her private relationships. This was clearly a computer on a terminal screen. I think as the technology improves and there is the ability to talk to these, there are ethical considerations. I'm going outside of IT and technology, and I'm thinking more of personal uses for AI because make no mistake, in 5 to 10 years, AI will be able to generate a movie one-to-one. We talk about one-to-many in marketing, one-to-one, niche content that only Todd would enjoy because he likes movies with surprise endings. Whatever it is that I like, I would be able to get. So I'm going to sit in a room and watch music and movies for me all day and shut out the outside world. You can imagine AI replicating beings of people that have died. Look up Dadbot, which is something that journalist James Vlahos, San Francisco journalist, developed to talk to his dad who had died. There's a TED Talk too, will make you cry. But again, this will be a reality. There are already companies that will take transcripts of your dead relative or dying relative and transfer it into a being. Make no mistake, this is coming. Is this right? Should we as humans be able to develop relationships with them when they're really not alive? I think those are the sort of things the bigger things I think we're going to grapple beyond the ethical considerations that we're struggling with today.
It's really interesting what you bring up because you're right that both of us spend a lot of time in tech. I feel like we get very caught up in the tactical and the immediate and the ROI and all your business acronyms. You raise a really good point, which is there are huge questions here about ethics and morals and values that get almost no airtime. My hypothesis would be that is actually something that's more important to most people, even if that's not the conversation on the business front. Yes. So it's an interesting point.
Absolutely. But yes, we are absolutely looking at all of this stuff. We do use private LLMs and we are absolutely grappling with a lot of this stuff. But again, we're experimenting. And I think there's a conscious right now that this is experimenting. And while a lot of our customers are using it for fraud detection, they've been doing that and spotting new viruses and things like that. That's been ongoing for years. Right. It's not just something that when ChatGPT massified in 2021, we turned the switch on and started infusing it into our products and services, nor did our customers.
There are some moments in AI that were so surprising to people and they felt more human. And then we accelerated conversations around, are we letting in the Terminator?
Absolutely. It happened really quickly.
Yeah,
Granted, it happened quickly. You could argue it happened quickly then when Google came online or when the internet came online. As we said at the beginning, things have sped up. So innovations take hold quickly when they're good.
What I find interesting too is to me, it feels like innovation is very much fits and starts. You have these periods of rapid acceleration and then we almost elliptically move back. As we're having these bigger conversations, what are some of the other trends that you're seeing in the research industry? What are some of those top insights opportunities right now?
Cool. One thing I would say, and you probably heard this from my conversation the last 30 minutes, is that it's democratized. Anybody can collect market research data today. Google survey pioneered that 7 years ago, and there's a million tools. That's great. But it's also a little bit dangerous because my stakeholders can go and find an online tool. These online tools are reaching right out to business leaders. There's a reason this is a bit of a science. We need to manage and be in the center of how you ask the question, because if you ask the wrong question, you're going to get garbage or democratize maybe a little bit too much. The speed and agility, as I said, long time coming. I can get insights in 24 to 48 hours on almost any population on Earth, which is incredible. I use that for the run the business research, which wasn't possible years ago. It's our job to make sense and bring all that data together, but there's a lot of it. There's telemetry data. which is one of the things I'm excited about. Telemetry data is passive usage data of how people use their devices, right? What apps I'm using, how long I'm using it, where I'm using it. That data is thousands of lines of code, and we haven't adequately classified or categorized that to be able to use it. But once we do, imagine how powerful that is. Way more powerful than a stale survey, right? Because it's actual use. The customers are talking with their feet. The thing that keeps me up at night, I think more than anything, is low engagement in these surveys. What I have for years and straight line surveys is we get to higher value B2B populations. If I say that I have 30 IT leaders' opinions, I better have 30 IT leaders' opinions. And short of verifying them on LinkedIn, which believe me, my team has done, it's hard to know exactly who's answering a survey or what mindset they're in when they're answering it. There's some solutions to it, but we have by no means figured that out. In my opinion, the way we take a survey, we shouldn't be taking a survey. There should be some more natural interface to get this information out of people. I think social listening is one tool that helps because it's looking at natural conversations. I don't think we're at a point where we can analyze that data completely as we should. But I think that sort of natural in situ conversation that we need to have with customers is not enabled by most of the tools we have right now.
There are two things that come to mind listening to you. And one of them is that it is so important to ask the right question if you want valuable research. And I'm not sure that we emphasize that enough. There are obviously a wide range of research and insights tools available, and the proper application of those tools is critical if you want to get answers that are actually helpful. How do you think about that?
I try to not talk about the tools with my staff. I used to, and I've learned that having too much of a conversation about where we're doing the focus group or that we're using a focus group puts them in the role of, I'm going to help you write the survey. And then they send me things that are not survey questions, and that's not useful. I would rather spend the time immersing ourselves into the product and into how the product could be used and into similar stuff that's out there on the market. And then I come up with the logistics and the approach we use behind the scenes. I might use it to sell into them if it's a unique approach that's sexy and fun and get them more engaged in the project. But I don't bring them in. I'd rather them spend the time talking about why they need this, if they need this, because there's a lot of times research is just not necessary. We're doing something right now where I think we ought to just make a strategic decision on which territory we're going to own. And then once we build out the experiences and use cases, we can start testing them. At some point, as a business, you have to make a decision or you're going to be left behind in the world we're in today. There's a lot more nimble, smaller competitors in many of the same spaces we are as a company. So sometimes I'd just like to do whatever I can to get the best information in front of my stakeholders or just help them make a decision quicker.
This is why I love talking to you, because I totally agree that sometimes insights is filling a gap for a lack of strategy or our unwillingness to make a decision. You're also making me ask you a question we didn't talk about ahead of time. I've been part of processes where you get to the end and get the insights back, and it didn't really answer the question you had in mind as the business. Do you have any advice on both sides of that equation for how can the business be sharper? How do we get to a place where everyone feels really good about that process and what it yielded?
Good. That's an excellent question. First of all, I bring them along.
Good.
So while I don't talk to them about whether we're using a conjoint and why we're using a conjoint, I would certainly bring them into the planning sessions, the focus groups. I almost force my stakeholders to attend the groups because I know how powerful it can be. You always hear your customers firsthand, and you always learn something that you never expected that wasn't one of those original objectives or was a completely different angle on those objectives from sitting in one of these. That's the way to get the value. I bring them along for the journey. You can do that in a survey too by bringing them into early data and things like that. The other thing that I've noticed, this is a little trick. I have a way out a lot of times. My boss taught me this. I work for a guy called Lance Hill, one of the best bosses I've ever had in my life. He has this idea where in case you don't get what you need, he has a backup plan. Whether that's social listening or a quick survey that I have prepaid credits for, I can always get information to fill in a controversial question or to answer something an exec. I do tend to have a backup place, but there is always the risk. The executive is not going to sit in 10 or even one focus group. And so it's up to you to find those one-on-one sessions with them, to sprinkle information and bring them along psychologically so they're not surprised later. And I think that's my job. It's my team's job. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, I love that. It's such a smart strategy. The thing I like about it is I really think research and insights work is an ongoing process. And I think sometimes people think it's like one and done, or we do like a segmentation every 3 years or whatever. I think that's a total miss because you get such interesting information every time. You're right. Sometimes it proves my hypothesis, and sometimes I was wrong, and I am happy to be wrong. And often you get a better idea out of it. So I want to sell that to other people just with no personal interest in it. I just think that there's very few examples in my life and career where it wasn't helpful. Like we didn't get something out of it.
Absolutely agree. That always on thing. I'll tell you a story. When I was on a plane, my last trip before COVID, I didn't know it. I was sitting next to a guy I was scared because I was in Taiwan during SARS and I read the news on a lot of people. My mind went to like, how can we, as a business, this didn't come in that moment. This came over weeks, but we should be looking at the psychology and the changing psyche of our customers. And we should have been doing that for years, but here's a chance where everybody can rally together, where everybody's in crisis, and there's no better time to advocate getting in the heads and hearts of your customers than when our business and our world is under threat. We started doing weekly surveys. We didn't have the momentum and the interest and the sort of people listening that we started having then. And I've tried to keep that momentum. But I think that's turned on people's understanding that the world is changing. If we don't really understand what people are going through, we're going to be left behind. We're going to miss an opportunity. There were a lot of opportunities, some of which we missed, some of which we as a company capitalized on. So it's a horrible thing. And the pandemic was horrible. And we lost some amazing people here at HP during it. But I will tell you, if one positive thing came out of it, I think it was that sort of customer centricity and us as a team rallying around understanding how customers feel. And I will tell you just one last anecdote. We've seen, which shocked me during 2020, 21, 22, we've started to see companies actually release via surveys, voice of the customer surveys publicly. Think about this. Yeah. The transparency and this view that we have to attend to the employee and the customer experience. I think we're at a pivotal point in history where the conversation is happening. How companies adjust and listen better and become more empathetic to their customers' employees is up to all of us. We're at an inflection point. It's us as insights or business leaders or hiring managers, people managers, just take advantage of that and move it positively.
That really resonates with me. We just did an episode on this Forrester study that came out. Did you see this? Their annual customer experience benchmark.
I have.
That data blew my mind. 3% of companies. I was like, is this a typo? And these are the best brands, right? It's a really important time. There is a disconnect between customer experience and brand/company perception of what we're delivering. I call that a value gap or value disconnect. But the other thing I hear you talking about is agility. Is there anything else you would add that might be helpful in terms of keeping a nimble insights practice?
The one thing I would add is, and this is also from talking to other insights leaders out there, and as they've tried to bring more agile tool sets and skill sets onto their teams, there's oftentimes resistance from the insights people themselves. You're doing something different. Is my job under threat because you're bringing more in-house? A lot of us research departments have had this discussion. It doesn't mean we're all doing it. A lot of us aren't, but we're bringing parts of it more in-house.
You're moving their cheese, as an old boss of mine said.
I think as we have these discussions, you have to be empathetic and attentive to the people on your team, especially those that have been doing this for decades, in terms of their own skill sets and helping them upskill and helping them still feel valued, and the strengths that they have and the experience that they have is utilized. That's up to us as we implement these nimble frameworks as leaders to keep in mind. The other stuff I think we talked about, having a plan and bringing in your stakeholders, but not too much.
You've given us a ton of insight. Maybe stepping out of that topic, a little
Sure.
bit. Can we just talk about work culture for a moment? I know that's
Yeah,
something that you're also really passionate about.
absolutely.
How has that changed over the course of your career? What are your thoughts on this?
The first thing, whenever we talk about this, comes to my mind is I remember my very first job at Kantar. It was in the late 90s. I remember when you went on vacation, there wasn't a laptop to bring. And even if you
Mm.
had a laptop, you didn't bring it unless you went to an internet cafe to check your webmails or whatever. You were really done for 2 weeks. You were present with your girlfriend or friends or family. I have not had a moment, if I'm honest, there has not been a moment short of the week between Christmas and New Year's, because our company shuts down, other companies do. You really don't have that time away. And I think that's something that we are grappling. We study work culture. You study work culture a lot. It's partly this podcast. We have not figured out how, especially as Americans, this is
Mm.
much worse in America, some extent in Asia as well. We have not figured out how to be comfortable and okay. If I have calls very early and then I have Asia calls with my team at night, I take a 30-minute nap in the middle of the day. I am twice as productive in cranking out decks in the afternoon versus just sitting there in a daze because I've been up since 5 o'clock. In terms of how to be productive and how to shut down, what makes you most creative, when you should focus and when you should do more automated tasks, tools can help us manage that and figure that out. But I think we as a society and we as companies and HR leaders need to figure out how to advocate shutting down, how to advocate collaboration, how to advocate focus time, upskill and learning and personal growth and a lot of those things. We have a long way to go, especially as Americans with that. I don't mean to focus so much on work-life balance, but I think it is a huge problem that we have not solved.
You're absolutely onto something there, both with the naps and the level of intensity that we operate on as Americans, I think is exhausting to us, but also maybe to others too, right?
Absolutely.
It's a lot. There's amazing things about being an American. I love being an American, but burnout is real too.
It really isn't. Being okay and the ability to check out versus that constant nervousness about your job. The last thing I will say is the other thing I've learned, and I think that we've become smarter about as managers over time, is reverse mentoring. I try to carve out a little bit of my time with people either that are junior researchers or that want to come into insights. They're in school or they want a career change or whatever, or they're just interested in learning a little bit about it. And you learn so much from those other voices. We talked about other industries, but these are people in other roles or other stages of life. I learn so much from the people I've mentored, probably more than they've learned from me. Over time, just recognizing the value in other voices. I know that McKinsey study came out a couple of years, and then it's controversial now, and they're saying, no, there's not a relationship between diversity and innovation. Bullshit.
Yeah.
I think we haven't figured out how to, come on. From just common sense tells you more opinions is better than less opinions. Fresher opinions, people that are out of the weeds, is a good thing. That's something I think that we as an industry have become smarter about, or we as just workers have become smarter about. It's something we're building programs around at HP. And I just think for anybody coming into work, it's an important thing to keep in mind.
I think if we put the politics aside, diverse perspectives clearly have economic benefits. There's a lot of data out there. Can we just talk about even you and I having two perspectives on something when we're generally aligned? I bet we would each learn something and take something.
That's right. Just common sense.
Common sense, and there's hard data too. Todd, this has been such a great conversation. So just our last question for you. What do you think that high performance companies do differently from average performers?
Okay, so we talked a lot about customer centricity. For the best companies, it's part of their DNA. Our president used to call this our secret sauce. He literally called insights our secret sauce because a lot of other tech companies weren't using insights the way we were. Secondly, listening to your employees. We've talked quite a bit about that. Otherwise, people will speak with their feet nowadays, right? Talent pipeline at all levels. One of the smartest decisions I ever made in my career was to hire people that had no research experience. We hired one person from the military, incredibly smart woman. We hired somebody from a data science background. We just brought in people, and we did it thanks to a great boss of mine who was our VP at the time. And it has paid off. They all went on to other jobs. One is in marketing, one's in data science, one's in another company. But we benefited, they benefited from that. So I'm going to make one last thing for diverse perspectives. The last thing I would say is just, and you hit on this, which is have 2 or 3 strategies, not
Mhm.
18. The best companies out there have one thing that they're going to do well, and that sort of guides them, their partners, their employees. I'll give you 2 examples. I'm Jewish. I think every religion has something to offer us. My rabbi would agree. BYU TV, the entertainment arm of the LDS or Brigham Young University, it's an old boss that went there. Their whole thing is not spreading religion. It's creating positive, engaging content that just makes people feel good, that spreads good, reminds people of the good in humanity. What an ethos that is, right? That everybody can rally against, from your production companies to your creatives, to your marketing people, to your shareholders, who are very clear what your objective is. Yeti is another company. A good friend of mine does research for them as a consultant. And their whole thing is just, we're going to keep stuff cold in environments where it's impossible to keep stuff cold. And everything they do, whether it's the biggest container or the littlest cup, and the prices you're paying, you know what value you're getting out of that brand. It's all just, again, one strategy versus 20 sort of side strategies.
What a wonderful way to close. Thank you so much. I knew you would have a lot to share with us. Thank you for joining us, Todd.
You're very welcome, Neeta. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.